Remember reading Goosebumps? If you're a 90s kid, for some of you, I might have just spoken your love language. Goosebumps was a global sensation of the 90s, selling over 4 million books a month during its prime, and for several years, it was the #1 best-selling book series of all time, winning it a Guinness World Record.
The #1 best-selling author in America, R.L. Stine, wants to give you lots and lots of goosebumps.
And now it is still the second best-selling series of all time, with 400 million copies sold globally, beaten out only by Harry Potter. Growing up, I never realized how big Goosebumps was, and it still is. It's a massive success story from an author who had no idea that his children's horror anthology was gonna sell so well, let alone become a massive franchise. And right now, it's kind of going through a revival. Now, I was born in '96. I missed Goosebumps at its peak, but even in the early 2000s, you couldn't take one step into a Scholastic book fair before your young, innocent eyes were greeted with the iconic creepy green slime and eerie yet colorful book covers by Tim Jacobus. Not to mention all of the merchandise, pencils, bookmarks, wallet cards, door knocker hangers. If you hadn't been influenced by the powers of consumerism yet, well, this all may have done you in. For myself, and I'm sure many others, it was always the covers that drew me in. The contrasting, saturated colors, the monsters, and vivid imagery. Each book kind of felt like a collectible card. Listen, Tim Jacobus is legendary, and he was absolutely killing it here in the pre-2006 era. From the sensation of the original 62 books that went on to spawn several sequel and spin-off series, a 90s Canadian television show, several video games based on the series, one of which even features Jeff Goldblum, a Disney park attraction, and a seemingly endless assortment of merchandise, not to mention controversies like book banning and ghostwriting. We're going to be exploring all of it. I'm Jay, and welcome to Remember Reading, where I give a deep dive on some of our most nostalgic childhood series, talk about their history and adaptations, while also sharing some of my memories about them. Now, this one happens to be a Halloween special, so come on in to the Captured in Words mansion, sit on down, please ignore the sponge under the sink and the monster blood on the stairs, and join me as I give my retrospective on Goosebumps by R.L. Stine. Viewer beware, you're in for a scare. Now, to truly understand Goosebumps, we need to talk about the man behind the slime. Robert Lawrence Stine, better known as R.L. Stine, was born in 1943.
Hello, I'm R.L. Stine.
As a young boy, he fell hard for comics, especially the gloriously grisly EC horror titles like Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror.
And I tried to remember what it was about them that I loved so much. And I remembered that it was that amazing mix of horror and humor. There was always a funny twist. People were always making horrible puns about it. It was funny. And it's sort of what I try to do at a much gentler level in my books.
With his mind set on becoming a comic artist, the only thing holding him back was, well, he wasn't that good.
And I would show mine around and everyone would say, "You're terrible, you're awful, you can't draw."
But when drawing didn't exactly pan out for him, a typewriter did.
I was 9 years old when I started writing. I found this typewriter up in the attic and brought it into my room, and I would be in there for hours typing little joke magazines.
Now, he didn't start his writing career as the Stephen King of kids, he started as Jovial Bob. After college, Robert Stine moved to New York City and began a relationship with Scholastic, and he spent the 70s cranking out jokes and goofy bits for teens, eventually editing a Scholastic humor magazine called Bananas for nearly a decade under that Jovial Bob pen name. And I know it's difficult to imagine the gag writer with the guy who gave an entire generation of children reoccurring ventriloquist dummy nightmares actually, that kind of checks out that he started with comedy, because Goosebumps is like half humor and half spookiness. Now, Stine actually only wanted to write comedy, but his horror turn would come in the mid-80s after a discussion with his publisher friend.
This editor, I was having lunch with her, and she said, "I'll bet you could write a good, scary teen novel. Go home and write a book called Blind Date." It wasn't even my idea, and she gave me the title. It's kind of embarrassing.
In 1986, he would publish Blind Date, and this one was a surprise hit. He followed it up with more young adult thrillers like The Babysitter and Beach House, and around the same time, Stine and his wife, Jane Waldhorn, who he married in 1969, decided to launch their own publishing company, Parachute Press, where Jane would serve as his main editor. Now, in 1989, a new kid arrived on the block, Fear Street. Fast, twisty horror set in the cursed town of Shadyside. Now, Fear Street is filled with the weird and supernatural elements that we would then see again a few years later in the Goosebumps books. Teenagers absolutely devoured Fear Street. Tens of millions of copies later, in fact 80 million copies in total, Stine was no longer just a funny guy who dabbled in scares, he was an entire brand. And yes, much later on, we'd see Fear Street get some Netflix original adaptations. While Stine worked on Fear Street, he also co-created Nickelodeon's puppet series, Eureka's Castle, which, yeah, it feels hilariously far from the haunted masks and murderous lawn gnomes he would go on to write, but it goes to show his range. So why did he pivot to scaring younger children? Largely, it was just market timing. In the late 80s and the early 90s, the Babysitters Club was dominating school book fairs, but it was skewed heavily towards girls. Scholastic suspected that a spooky, funny series would hook everyone in that 7 to 12 age range. I'm not sure if they predicted that 30-year-olds would then have so much nostalgia for them that they would also be the main audience. Now, keep in mind, not only did Stine write his point horror novels and Fear Street, but there's other authors out there like Christopher Pike. I believe Christopher Pike was writing before Stine, actually. He wrote a bunch of young adult horror for teens that was really popular at the time as well, and he was writing in the late 80s, early 90s, and obviously children would also want their own spooky series. Now, Stine's wife also thought it was a great idea, but Stine himself was actually hesitant. He didn't just want to soften Fear Street, but eventually he did agree to writing a series for a younger audience if he could find the perfect name. And it just so happens that flipping through a TV guide one day, he saw an ad for Goosebumps Week, and the lightning struck. Stine was contracted to write 6 Goosebumps novels, and the first book, Welcome to Deadhouse, published in July 1992, is darker than what the series would become. It didn't have the same humor that he was known for later on, and Stine admitted he was still finding the right voice for the series. Now, following the first book, 3 more Goosebumps books would be published in 1992. Stay Out of the Basement, which released the same month, followed by Monster Blood and Say Cheese and Die. And they didn't sell that well at first, believe it or not. And this was likely because of the lack of marketing from the publisher. But then word of mouth started doing what it does best on playgrounds and in lunch lines, and within months, Monster Blood and Company were moving tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and they appeared in every school. Stine had tapped a simple truth. Kids liked to be scared safely. Even though they were frequently challenged by the American Library Association, Goosebumps managed to get its green, slimy grip on an entire generation. During an era when the universal classic monsters were still all the rage, slasher films of the 80s were still going strong, and the new horror of the 90s was just beginning to boom and be watched by all the cool adults. kids now felt like they also had a place at the campfire. They had their own spooky, albeit age-appropriate stories to pass around at school and share with their friends. And as you know, it was a massive success. But success, of course, breeds imitators, and the shelves soon filled up with knockoffs like Shivers, Bone Chillers, Dead Time Stories, Graveyard School, and so much more. And honestly, some of these were actually pretty decent. Shivers gained a pretty good following and was said to be a little darker and spookier than Goosebumps. Bone Chillers had its infamous Franken-Turkey and even got a TV show of its own in 1996. However, others were shameless parodies that looked like they were titled by AI. I'm looking at you, Gooflumps by Are You Slime. Stay out of the bathroom. Do I even want to ask what happened in the bathroom? I love how it has to clarify, this is just a goof. For legal reasons, this is just a goof. Anyway, none of them could capture that exact Stine cocktail, the zippy pacing, the cliffhanger chapter endings, not to mention like the last page that would always have some sort of twist and would make you want to go and reach for the next one. There's a reason why Stine went supernova. Those original 6 did so well that of course Scholastic wanted him to continue the phenomena, and the release cadence would snap into a relentless rhythm, with 1 book releasing a month, sometimes 2, each one a compact 120-ish pages in big type, perfect for a school night, but meaty enough to feel like a real novel when you're 10 years old. And the magic wasn't just the frequency, but it was the formula. Each book offered safe scares, cliffhangers at chapter ends, twisty endings, and a striking cover. That formula is really part of the magic. Goosebumps weren't really intimidating, they were collectible. Finish one by Friday, trade it with a friend on Monday, whisper about the twist at recess. Now, Stine, at his peak, was reportedly drafting a Goosebumps book in about 2 to 3 days and writing the entire thing in 8, with roughly around 12 books published a year for the original 62-book series. Which seems like a lot, and we are going to address the whole ghostwriter situation a little later in the video. Spoiler alert, he did have some help. But hold on, first I want to go over some of the original books in more detail, starting with Welcome to Deadhouse.
Welcome to Deadhouse. I think you're going to like your new house.
The first book follows siblings Amanda and Josh Benson, who move to a creepy old house in the small town of Dark Falls. Now, the townsfolk here, they all seem very odd, and many of them mention how they used to live in Amanda and Josh's new house. And in addition, Amanda keeps seeing figures that suddenly disappear, they're both having nightmares, and something about the town's cemetery sets the family's dog on edge. This leaves the kids wondering if there's more to Dark Falls than meets the eye, and the reveal in this book is still a gut punch to this day. The cemetery is filled with the names of the townsfolk. They're all undead, kept alive by luring one fresh family a year to the same trap, the Deadhouse. Now, this one was actually the 3rd Goosebumps book that I read as a kid, and I was definitely surprised that it was so much bleaker compared to the others. But I really liked that. I remember that graveyard scene where a character's face melts off and his eyeballs roll out. That gave me chills as a kid. Understandably so. And while I do think that the series finds its groove later on with the more wackier, out there stories and the humor, sometimes the goofiness and the humor can kind of undercut the spookiness of the story, which I guess that is the point. This is written for kids, not for 29-year-olds that have a YouTube channel where they talk about books and are constantly looking for nostalgia. Now, apparently, director and writer George A. Romero, yes, that Romero, the same who directed the Night of the Living Dead series, Creepshow, and many others, wrote an unproduced film adaptation of Welcome to Deadhouse. The screenplay actually surfaced years after his death in the University of Pittsburgh's Horror Studies archive. What's really interesting about Romero's version of Welcome to Deadhouse is that it focused a lot more on capitalism and greed. In his version, the people of Dead Falls are not ghouls, they are zombies. Of course, this is Romero. But they're kind of more sympathetic characters. They want to be set free, but they're being taken advantage of by their town leader named Foster DeVries. Now, Foster DeVries is a completely original character. DeVries is the man who is responsible for the plastics factory accident that killed all the townspeople, and now he is using these townspeople to lure in new families. It's unfortunate we never got to see this adaptation because Romero was actually very passionate about making this happen. He read Goosebumps with his kids and he was fighting to make this adaptation happen. He even sent in a letter to Fox, but nothing came of it. And this was likely just because at the time, Romero wasn't at his peak anymore. But moving on to the next book, Stay Out of the Basement. This was the very first Goosebumps book that I read, and it's still one of my absolute favorites in the franchise. In this book, Margaret and Casey's dad is a botanist who's experimenting in the basement, which sounds kind of wrong, and it is. He's trying to create a plant-human hybrid, and pretty soon the visitors are going missing, vines are groaning, the house smells wrong, and their dad starts acting chlorophylllic.
Why are leaves growing out of your head?
It's revealed that the plants have started to take on human form, and when one of them is copying their father, this is where Stine goes full body horror for kids. This is one of those books that probably made many kids scared of the basement, at least I was. And it ends with one of those classic Goosebump reversals. After the children identify their dad and kill the clone, everything seems to be normal again. Their dad promises to stop experimenting, but as they walk away, a flower whispers that it is their real father. Is dad experimenting again? We don't really know. Now, these surprise twist endings or open-ended endings soon become a staple of the series, but this book was always a favorite of mine, and I love the TV show episode for this as well. It's one of the best. Now, I have always loved the original cover art for Stay Out of the Basement. It's still one of my favorites, but I was shocked to find that this wasn't done by Tim Jacobus. It was done by Jim Thiessen. You see, early in the series, Scholastic was trying to settle on which artist to use, so they gave Tim book 1 and Jim book 2. Eventually, they settled on Tim Jacobus because of his more saturated, bright colors and his slightly cartoonish art style. And while I do think they made the right choice, I love the kind of darker vibe, the more realistic style of this cover. It's always going to be one of my favorites. And I remember it really standing out to me as a kid. It made me think of the Swamp Thing. I even like this one better than the version that Tim Jacobus made later on. That one wasn't nearly as creepy in my opinion. And then we have Monster Blood. Now this one focuses on a young boy named Evan who stays with his aunts while his parents search for a house, and he buys a can of Monster Blood from the toy store, and this begins to grow and grow at an uncontrollable rate. And the reader spends most of the book following Evan as he attempts to control the growth of this Monster Blood. I would say that here is where Stine leans a bit more into the comedy. Now, this one I actually didn't read until a bit later, so it was never a favorite of mine growing up, but I still enjoyed it when I read it. I know this one is nostalgic for a lot of people, and Monster Blood actually became the first returning villain in the series. We'd see Monster Blood return in a few sequels. And really, what's more Goosebumps than green slime? Now, you can't talk about Goosebumps without bringing up the TV show, and not that show. In 1995, the books jumped off the shelf and onto the screens, and this is where Goosebumps was truly at its peak. Now, the Canadian series, shot mostly in Ontario, aired on Fox in the US and YTV in Canada. This is where I watched it, and honestly, shout out to YTV for making my childhood amazing, especially the hosts, Carlos and Sugar. They were the best. Any fellow Canadians watching, let me know in the comments. The Goosebumps show quickly became a phenomenon in its own right. It was hosted by R.L. Stine himself, and the show was an anthology that adapted many of the beloved books from the original series, as well as the Tales to Give You Goosebumps and even Series 2000, spanning across 74 episodes and over 4 seasons. Fox gave the premiere its 1-hour primetime treatment, hosted by the Crypt Keeper himself. You can watch the full thing on YouTube, and that's how much confidence they had, or how much they banked on the brand. And the first episode was The Haunted Mask, the 11th book in the series, which was no accident. This is arguably the most iconic Goosebumps story, and picking it as the opener told viewers this is what Goosebumps feels like. It also helped that it aired on October 27th, only days before Halloween. The Haunted Mask is about a young girl named Carly Beth who's easily scared, she has an annoying brother, and she's constantly bullied by these 2 boys. So she decides to go to a scary Halloween mask store and buy a mask that will terrify them. But the mask that she chooses, this one ends up fusing to her face and she can't take it off. Fun fact, R.L. Stine says that the mask idea came from his own son who had trouble removing his Frankenstein Halloween mask. This one's always been up there as one of my favorite episodes alongside Stay Out of the Basement. Now, who do we have to thank for this show? Margaret Loesch, the CEO at Fox Kids, had a son who loved the books, and she championed the adaptation. Fox was already building out its kids brand. Loesch was the one who had championed Power Rangers and X-Men, the animated series. Honestly, let's take a moment of silent gratitude for Margaret Loesch. Anyways, Goosebumps was the perfect fit, and God bless this woman, she basically made my childhood. The premiere of Goosebumps did stellar numbers. It broke viewership records on YTV in Canada. It drew over 14 million on Fox before even settling into its regular time slot. And it even earned actress Catherine Long a Gemini Award, and the show's reputation as a Halloween classic was born right then. Now, the VHS sold almost 3 million units, and book sales went from 1 million a month to almost 5 million. Fun fact, in R.L. Stine's autobiography, he revealed that the crew wanted to use a rubber worm when Carly Beth bites into the sandwich, but Catherine Long insisted on eating a real worm to make it realistic. And Stine later reveals it took 12 attempts with a new worm every time. That is some dedication to the part, so shout out to Catherine Long and those 12 worms. Over its run, the series did a mix of episodes, some as 2-parters, others as 1-hour specials, and it aired in more than 100 countries. It became the top kids show in the US for 4 consecutive years and gave us one of the most unforgettable theme songs in children's TV history. Stine's briefcase opening, the shadow G creeping along, all the eerie scenes, it's just so iconic. The show also just gave visual life to those monsters that we've only ever held between our hands on the page, and seeing the Haunted Mask and Attack of the Mutant and Say Cheese and Die in live action with practical effects, it was awesome. And despite the small budget, the excellent use of lighting and practical effects and the cozy, campy 90s vibe, I absolutely loved watching this show on YTV growing up, and it's something I still love to go and rewatch every fall season when I get the chance. There's really not anything like it. Like, it's so 90s. It is 90s distilled, and I love that. Overall, I think The Haunted Mask is probably the best produced episode from the 90s era, but there's so many other classics. I mean, Stay Out of the Basement, One Day at Horrorland, A Night in Terror Tower. There's so many classics. Let me know in the comments what your favorite episode of Goosebumps was. In the TV incarnation of Attack of the Mutant, it features Adam West, who of course played Batman in the 1960s series, and here he cameos as a retired comic villain. And apparently Adam West actually kept the costume afterwards. Now, many of the young child stars from Goosebumps went on to become household names. For instance, Ryan Gosling played Greg in Say Cheese and Die, which is an episode that is so nostalgic for me. Also, Hayden Christensen, long before taking on the role of Anakin Skywalker and leaving no Padawan behind, he got to work alongside Slappy the Dummy in his role in Night of the Living Dummy 3. And Laura Vandervoort, who would go on to star as Supergirl in Smallville and Lisa in V. She had a role in 2 episodes of Goosebumps, The Haunted House Game and Deep Trouble. Now, you may remember Are You Afraid of the Dark? This show came out just a few years prior, and it followed a similar horror anthology format, and this is often considered to have a darker and scarier tone, with Goosebumps having a more campy, cheesy, and comical feel. I grew up watching both of these, and to this day, I still have a hard time deciding which one I like better, because they're both great for different reasons. But regardless, if you were a young fan of spooky, creepy tales at the time, then you weren't going hungry. What the show did more than anything was cement the Goosebumps universe in people's minds, and for many who watched the show first, the show was their canon, and then kids would pick up the books after they'd seen the episodes, and that created even more buzz for the print side. By the mid-90s, Scholastic had turned Goosebumps into a household name, and they weren't about to stop there. The next evolution of the series was Tales to Give You Goosebumps, a 6-book anthology series that packed 10 short stories into each volume. That's 60 bite-sized scares in total, tailor-made for kids who couldn't commit to a full novel, but still wanted that quick jolt of fear before bed. Now, these volumes came shrink-wrapped with Goosebumps merchandise, everything from bookmarks and book lights to, yes, glow-in-the-dark boxers. Oh, no! I'd like to see the marketing meeting where this was approved. Now, these collections also gave us one of Goosebumps' most enduring icons, Curly the Skeleton. Now, while Slappy the Dummy is kind of the more known mascot nowadays, Curly became the very first mascot for the franchise, and he was popping up on posters, lunchboxes, and the coveted Goosebumps fan club mailers. Tim Jacobus's first design depicted Curly as this ghostly figure with wild, curly hair, but Scholastic wasn't sold. They asked for a redesign, and by the second book, Curly was reborn as the sunglass-wearing, buzz-cut skeleton that we all recognize, soon joined by his bulldog, Drool. Now, Curly wasn't actually in the stories themselves, he was just a marketing invention, but he gave Goosebumps an identifiable face, a face like a punk rock crypt keeper for kids. And it worked, pure 90s merchandising genius. The first 5 books kept that familiar slime drip design of the main series, but then the final entry, More and More and More Tales to Give You Goosebumps, switched things up, framing its cover art like a creepy portrait, and later reprints of the earlier volumes adopted this new aesthetic for consistency. Now, while these anthologies weren't the mainline Goosebumps, they played a major role in expanding the universe. Several of their stories later appeared in the TV show, including Don't Wake Mummy, The Perfect School, An Old Story, Awesome Ants, and Teacher's Pet. Fans who grew up watching those episodes might not even realize they came from the Tales collections. And the spin-off success didn't stop there. I'm gonna cover all the spin-offs in this video, but Tales to Give You Goosebumps helped launch the Goosebumps Fan Club, a mail-in club that rewarded members with newsletters, trivia, exclusive stories, and collector merch, posters, stickers, water bottles, hats, and exclusive information about upcoming books. This then expanded to the Goosebumps Collectors Club, which sent books alongside collectible merch. And just when it seemed like Goosebumps had conquered every possible corner of pop culture, from books, TV, toys, lunchboxes,
New Goosebumps fruit roll-ups with scary peel-outs. And fruit by the foot with creepy Goosebumps story teasers. So
R.L. Stine found a brand new way to terrify his readers by making us the main character.
And give yourself goosebumps, the books where you choose from 20 different scary endings.
In 1995, Scholastic launched Give Yourself Goosebumps, a choose-your-own-adventure style spin-off that turned reading into a literal game of survival. Each book placed the reader inside a horror scenario where every choice, left turn, open the door, eat the glowing jelly, led to a different fate. The tagline said it best: reader beware, you choose the scare. Now these were not just passive page turners, they were little paper death traps. Every few pages you would hit like a fork in the road and you would have to decide. Pick wrong and you might end up trapped in a time loop or transformed into a mutant or eaten by some unspeakable creature. Pick right and maybe you would survive, but usually surviving meant that you made it out alive, but you're cursed or you're shrunken or you got transformed into an inanimate object or something like that. The average book had over 20 endings and only a handful of them were what you would call happy. The series ran until 2000, clocking in at 50 books in total, including 8 special editions. Now, the first 22 books used a similar design to the original series, but with a metallic holographic prism effect, a complete 90s flex if there ever was one. However, starting with book 23, the slime and holographic look were ditched in favor of a more sci-fi aesthetic. This wasn't all new to Stine. Stine had actually been writing game books for years before Goosebumps, so this was familiar territory. He once said that he'd jot down 100 numbered ideas on a pad, then fill in the jokes and the jump scares later. It was less like writing a novel and more like crafting a labyrinth. But unlike the main series, Stine's contract for this one didn't require him to be the sole author. In fact, Give Yourself Goosebumps and Tales to Give You Goosebumps are the only spin-offs that he's admitted to having help with. Several ghostwriters contributed under his guidance, authors like Catherine Lance and Scott Westerfeld. Yes, Ugly's Scott Westerfeld. Now, this series also connected back to the Goosebumps universe in some fun ways. For instance, Return to Terror Tower was a sequel to A Night in Terror Tower. Revenge of the Body Squeezers continued the story from the series 2000, which I'll talk about soon, and familiar faces like Slappy and Monster Blood popped up in cameos. It was Goosebumps' chaotic continuity gone multiverse. While Tim Jacobus illustrated the first cover, as the workload grew, Scholastic brought in Mark Nagata and later Craig White, who added digital 3D textures and gave the books their distinct shiny nightmare look. In 1996, we'd see the first Goosebumps board game, Terror in the Graveyard by Milton Bradley.
Goosebumps, get through the graveyard alive or be changed into a monster.
And this quickly became a #1 bestseller. It was soon followed by Shrieks and Spiders, the storytelling card game, and One Day at Horrorland. And this one, man, I unlocked a memory when doing research for this video and I found an image of this board game. I realized I have very early memories of playing this. There was also A Night in Terror Tower, as well as a handful of other games and puzzles, which really really helped cement Goosebumps as the #1 children's brand nationwide. When the Goosebumps website launched in 1997, it provided games, sneak peek previews, clips from the TV show, and even writing tips from R.L. Stine. Now, over the years, the website has evolved, and it's still running today. Now, around this time, we got to see the first Goosebumps games for PC, Escape from Horrorland, published in 1996, and this was a big one. The Spielberg-backed Jeff Goldblum starring Goosebumps game that felt more like a Hollywood project than a Scholastic spin-off. Developed by DreamWorks Interactive, Escape from Horrorland served as a direct sequel to book number 16, One Day at Horrorland, picking up with Lizzie, Luke, and their friend Clay as they get sucked back into the terrifying theme park. The game was a full motion video point-and-click adventure, and this was a format that perfectly sat in the glorious 90s era when developers decided to combine real actors, green screen sets, and awkwardly composited CGI monsters, and this thing had a budget. Spielberg's DreamWorks and Bill Gates' investment in the new studio reportedly funneled in over $50 million for production. You had elaborate monster suits, practical effects, even miniature model sets used for background plates. And yes, the man, the legend, Jeff Goldblum plays Dracula, because why not? Isabella Rossellini shows up as Lady Cadaver, R.L. Stine even makes a cameo, and the story unfolds through a mix of puzzles and exploration. You dodge laser-eyed statues, survive Werewolf Village, decode hieroglyphics in the Valley of the Kings, and even take part in a pickpocket dance sequence inside of Dracula's castle. I swear I'm not making that up. And depending on your choices, you either save the Morris family and escape, or you fail and return home to find everyone turned into Horrorland monsters. It's a short game, it's weirdly paced, it's gloriously of its time, but it's still worth playing even now. And honestly, Escape from Horrorland, it sold around 130,000 copies, it won Times Magazine's Best Kids Game Award, and even nabbed a nomination for Best Adaptation of Linear Media. For a mid-90s FMV game, that is practically legendary. A year later, DreamWorks would try again with Attack of the Mutant. This was based on the 25th Goosebumps book and its TV episode, and here you would play as a kid who gets off at the wrong bus stop and accidentally wanders into the world of his favorite comic book and joins the League of Good Guys to stop the masked mutant from turning reality into one giant comic strip. Unlike its predecessor, this one was a first-person 3D adventure. No live actors, besides the cutscene at the beginning where a man is carrying a watermelon on the bus for some reason. The game then transitions into chunky CGI heroes and villains rendered with that unmistakable late 90s charm. I actually played this one growing up. I believe it was one of those CD-ROM games that you got in a cereal box back in the day, because that's how we got a lot of our PC games like Roller Coaster Tycoon, Pajama Sam, Scrabble, Freddy the Fish, all those amazing games. This game used to scare the crap out of me as a kid. I'm sure it's not actually that scary, but for me as a kid, it was terrifying and I could never even get that far into it. I don't know what it was as a kid. I don't know why I was so terrified of this game. Maybe it was just the clunky animations that gave me nightmares. That could be it. You navigate the mutant's lair, solve puzzles, and collect hero gear to build your own costume, and Adam West even reprises his role as the Galloping Gazelle.
Nice work. I'm now back and ready to rumble.
Because apparently every Goosebumps game had to have a baffling celebrity cameo. It's a little clunky, the movement feels like skating on ice, but for fans of the era, there's a lot of charm to the colorful absurdity of this one. But it's definitely not as fondly remembered as the previous game. Now, this was also the final Goosebumps project from DreamWorks Interactive, marking the end of an oddly ambitious little corner of the franchise. Now, at the height of Goosebumps mania, Stine's monsters even crept their way into Walt Disney World. On October 8th, 1997, Disney's MGM Studios unveiled the Goosebumps Horrorland Fright Show and Funhouse.
I'm here at the annual Goosebumps Fright Show Christmas party, and it's a weird one. No thanks, I'm allergic to monster blood. Oh, sweet. Oh, well, that would make a lovely centerpiece.
A live stage attraction that starred Amazo the Magician, yes, the same unlucky illusionist from Bad Hair Day, whose act quickly goes off the rails when Slappy the Dummy...
Hey, Slappy, what are you doing here? What did you do to those kids? What did I do to them?
Curly the Skeleton...
Pretty Curly's the name, horror's the game. Just call me your master of ceremonies.
Prince Koru and Cuddles the Giant Hamster crashed the stage. Slappy tried to enslave the children volunteers, Amazo vanished in a puff of smoke, and a magic duel ensued. And by the finale, Amazo and the kids had outsmarted the monsters.
Right this way, guys. Head over here. Thank you so much for your help. Believe me, I could never have done without it.
Sending the audience off into the Goosebumps Funhouse, a mere maze filled with references to classic books like The Haunted Mask and A Night in Terror Tower. Now, this attraction was very short-lived, and just a year after opening, it closed, likely due to the declining sales of the books and the TV show getting less views, but it was still an incredible time to be a Goosebumps fan. Now, of course, Goosebumps didn't rise to fame without any controversies.
A popular children's book series sets off an adult controversy.
Back in the mid-90s, when kids were devouring these books, a lot of parents and educators were complaining. Some claimed that R.L. Stine was too frightening for young readers, others accused of them dabbling in the occult and witchcraft.
Satan is giving your children unnatural, irrational, ungodly goosebumps.
By 1997, the American Library Association had officially filed 46 challenges to the series, most of them coming from school libraries. And for the decade, Goosebumps was the 15th most challenged book series in the US. Ironically, R.L. Stine has said multiple times that he purposefully made these books safe scary. He avoided talking about topics that are truly terrifying, that will truly scare kids. Stuff like divorce, or domestic abuse, or drugs, profanity, gore. He wanted children to face fears that were wild and absurd, but clearly make-believe, clearly fantasy. He explains the idea is to give kids a safe place to be scared. And obviously this isn't new. Critics over the decades have feared about children's imaginations being corrupted by dime novels and fairy tales and comic books. However, a lot of other parents, the other defenders, with maybe a few more brain cells, claimed the opposite, that learning to face fears through fiction actually helps children build courage. Encountering make-believe dangers teaches resilience. And of course, Goosebumps wasn't alone. Soon after, Harry Potter would receive similar backlash of promoting witchcraft in schools. Really, the truth of it is that the moral panic of children's literature is really just as old as storytelling itself. I feel like this is something we see with every generation, and that's probably not gonna change anytime soon. By 1997, the original Goosebumps series had officially wrapped up, closing the coffin lid on what was one of the most successful children's franchises in publishing history. But now, with no Goosebumps books flying off the shelves, Scholastic sales took a massive hit, dropping their profit margins by over 40%. So the solution was obvious. They needed to bring the monster back from the grave. Enter Goosebumps Series 2000, a new name, a new look, and a promise of 2,000 times the scares. The series debuted in January 1999 1998 with Cry of the Cat, hitting stores barely a month after the final book in the original run, and it was marketed as the darker, edgier evolution of Goosebumps, a facelift for a new generation of slightly older, slightly braver readers. While the original series had leaned on a border style with bright slime drips and campfire fun, Series 2000 went a little bit moodier. The covers dropped the border and showcased metallic blues, deep reds, flashes of lightning, and the artwork is just a little bit darker, honestly some of the best of the series. Scholastic wanted to lure in the 12-year-olds who might have thought they'd outgrown Goosebumps, and for the most part, it worked.
Enter the new millennium of fear. Goosebumps Series 2000 by R.L. Stine, wherever books are sold.
The stories were a little more cinematic, some even included prologues, something the original series never did, which kinda gave them a movie opening vibe right from page 1. And when R.L. Stine himself described this new run as Goosebumps but scarier, yeah, he meant it. I mean, Cry of the Cat opens with an accidental killing and supernatural revenge. And Brain Juice, I mean, just look at the cover of Brain Juice. Invasion of the Body Squeezers was one that spanned 2 books, which was a first for the franchise. And we actually saw a lot of familiar monsters return in Series 2000. Bride of the Living Dummy and Slappy's Nightmare gave everyone's favorite demonic puppet new life, while Return to Horrorland and Return to Ghost Camp brought back some of those, popular settings from the first series.
Yes, Goosebumps 2000 and my Count Chocula cereal.
Wow, spooky new marshmallow.
However, in my opinion, this series never really got the love that it deserved, which is unfortunate. Goosebumps 2000, I mean, it has some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows when compared to the OG series. Books like The Werewolf in the Living Room and Headless Halloween and Dr. Jekyll and Heidi, those are like peak Goosebumps. Those are some of the best. But then other stories, stuff like Return to Ghost Camp, The Mummy Walks, and Earth Geeks Must Go, they were not really good. Even with the new moody tone and the sleek branding, things behind the scenes weren't as smooth as the marketing implied. By 2000, Goosebumps books were selling 200,000 copies a month, a far cry from the 4 million monthly sales just a few years prior, and Stine was originally contracted to write 40 Series 2000 books, but the line abruptly ended after only 25. And the franchise wouldn't see any new mainline books until 8 years later. Legal battles between Scholastic and Parachute Press, the company that Stine co-founded, meant that production came to a screeching halt. Ironically, the final entry, Ghost in the Mirror, was the only book released in the actual year 2000. We do know the titles of 2 unreleased books, The Incredible Shrinking Fifth Grader and When the Snake Bites. And now we should probably talk about the big legal dispute between Stine and Scholastic, because behind the haunted masks and the possessed dummies, there was a much more real horror story brewing, one that had to do with contracts and lawsuits and millions of dollars. By the late 90s, the relationship between R.L. Stine and Scholastic had started to unravel. When Goosebumps first exploded in popularity, nobody, least of all Stine, had any idea how massive it would become, and the original deal between Scholastic and Parachute Press gave Stine ownership of the Goosebumps name, but Scholastic controlled all the merchandising rights. That meant the books were his, but the TV shows, the toys, t-shirts, video games, lunchboxes, and Goosebumps boxer shorts were all Scholastic. And Stine was seeing only a small slice of that revenue pie. As the franchise became a billion-dollar machine, Stine realized the contract didn't reflect its success, and eventually they renegotiated, giving Parachute Press a bigger percentage of merchandising and more control over outside deals. But things got tense when several of those deals fell through. Parachute claimed that Scholastic was intentionally blocking their ability to profit from the brand, while Scholastic accused Parachute of overstepping their bounds by making negotiations on their own and hosting events. The partnership that had once built a literary empire was now tearing down the middle. And then came the Fire Nation. I mean, the lawsuits. In 1999, Parachute Press sued Scholastic for $36 million, alleging unpaid royalties and breach of contract, while Scholastic countered with its own lawsuit, claiming Stine hadn't written all the Goosebumps books himself. Now, according to Scholastic, Stine only wrote the first 16 titles before hiring ghostwriters to help meet the demand, and only contributed minimal changes. Now, this, Scholastic argued, violated his contract's sole writer clause, and had even harmed the brand's quality of content, going so far as to excuse ghostwriters for the declining popularity of the series. Now, for context, R.L. Stine was pumping out like 12 books a year, 1 book a month, while touring and promoting and running the Goosebumps machine. So while their claim raised eyebrows, it wasn't exactly unbelievable. R.L. Stine initially denied using ghostwriters, but during the proceedings, he eventually admitted that after book 17, he did start using some assistants, though he had insisted that those freelancers had only helped flesh out those chapter-by-chapter outlines that he had created, sometimes drafting manuscripts, but Parachute Press argued that R.L. Stine had complete creative control and the initial ideas were all his own, and belonged to Stine, with Stine often discarding and rewriting those draft manuscripts. Now, years later, Stine would claim, "I wrote all the Goosebumps books myself, believe it or not. Sometimes I had writers help me with the outlines, but all books were by me." I remember when I found out that he used ghostwriters, I was a little disappointed, to be honest. It kind of takes away a bit of that magic. However, it sounds like Stine was always heavily involved. The ideas were all his. He was all very heavily involved in redrafting and rewriting it. So he didn't have ghostwriters completely writing the books for him. And to be fair, this wasn't something unique to Goosebumps either. The authors of Animorphs, another Scholastic series, openly used ghostwriters and even thanked them in the acknowledgements. However, Scholastic latched onto this and they tried using this as leverage to claim that it voided parts of their agreement with R.L. Stine and Parachute Press. While the lawsuits dragged on, the Goosebumps brand started to fracture. The TV show was canceled and moved into reruns on Fox Family, now Freeform, and Scholastic, already deep in legal warfare with Stine, turned around and sued Fox for airing the reruns, demanding $2.7 million in damages. It was like Goosebumps had turned into Law & Order publishing division. And in the fallout, Stine's contract with Scholastic wasn't renewed in 2000. He took his talents to HarperCollins, launching The Nightmare Room, which actually got a short-lived but fun TV adaptation on Kids WB. He also announced Goosebumps Gold, a planned new 12-book series that would have featured titles like Slappy New Year and The Haunted Mask Lives, but unfortunately that project never got off the ground, likely because of the ongoing legal mess surrounding who actually owned Goosebumps at this point. There was even discussion of a Tim Burton-directed Goosebumps movie that fell through, and man, like, what I would do to see a Tim Burton Goosebumps movie. I'm so disappointed we never saw this. After years of countersuits, appeals, and stalled business deals, this all finally came to an end in 2003, when Scholastic agreed to pay $9.65 million to Parachute Press in exchange for full ownership of the Goosebumps trademark and publishing rights. The court battles were over, and Scholastic had its monster back. And while all of that might sound bleak, it also paved the way for the Goosebumps Revival a few years later, because once the dust settled, the franchise was free to rise from the grave again. The thing is, this is now the 2000s. There's a lot of competition. During that 8-year gap, young readers were now crazy about Harry Potter, with the final book just being released in 2007. Goosebumps series sold over 400 million copies, and the only series to outsell it was Harry Potter with 600 million. Not to mention there was Aragon, the inheritance cycle, as well as a series of unfortunate events, and so many other amazing series of the time. But Goosebumps wasn't forgotten. By the late 2000s, nostalgia was running high, and the fan letters were piling up. Kids who'd grown up with Goosebumps were now in their teens or 20s, and they wanted the series back. So in April 2008, R.L. Stine and Scholastic decided to resurrect the franchise for a new generation. Goosebumps Horrorland, a bold new era that would do something the original series never had: tell a continuous story. Goosebumps Horrorland kicked off with Revenge of the Living Dummy and Creep from the Deep, ushering readers into a serialized 19-book saga that ran across 2 story arcs. Each book stood on its own, but they also tied into this bigger mystery involving the Horrorland theme park, a monstrous amusement park run by the ghoulish horrors. This new continuity effectively created a shared Goosebumps universe, revisiting characters and storylines from older books like The Haunted Mask, Deep Trouble, and Monster Blood, though there was often lots of contradictions. But every few books, clues and artifacts from the park would reappear, connecting the standalone scares into an overarching plot about the sinister secrets behind Horrorland itself. And to make it even more immersive, Scholastic launched a companion website, Enter Horrorland, that tied directly into the books. Fans could unlock bonus stories, games, and secret messages from Slappy the Dummy himself. It was a surprisingly ambitious transmedia experience for its time, and it worked. Goosebumps was officially back from the grave. Around the same time, Scholastic also began publishing Classic Goosebumps, a reprint featuring new cover art by Brandon Dorman and bonus behind the screams content. Each of these being paired with one of the new titles, bringing old fans and new fans together. Now by 2010, the series expanded beyond its original 12-book plan, totaling 19 books in all. And the final stretch revolved around cursed souvenirs brought home from Horrorland, haunted artifacts that unleashed fresh chaos in the real world. Now, once Horrorland wrapped up, Stine wasn't ready to close the gates just yet. In 2011, the next spin-off, Goosebumps Hall of Horrors, arrived, and this was originally intended to be the 3rd arc of the Horrorland saga, but it evolved into its own 6-book miniseries hosted by the Storykeeper, a mysterious curator of terrifying tales trapped within the hall itself. Now, these would return to the standalone structure of the classic books. There was no reoccurring story here, but it did have a subtle framing device. These were the cursed confessions of kids who'd fallen victim to the horrors within. Think of it as kind of the Twilight Zone meets Tales from the Crypt, but Goosebumps style. To celebrate the franchise's 20th anniversary, Stine and Scholastic unleashed Goosebumps Most Wanted in 2012, a greatest hits revival of the series' most iconic monsters. And here we'd find some familiar faces: Slappy, the Haunted Mask, the Abominable Snowman, all featured on the covers in a wanted poster style, complete with a reward and crime summary. And Stine introduces the main villain of each book. The cover art here really captured the monsters in a more detailed and realistic style. It was the perfect blend of nostalgia and novelty, appealing both to returning fans and a brand new generation. The same year, Goosebumps fever hit its peak again. Scholastic rolled out a Welcome to Horrorland board game, dozens of ebooks, a Trick or 8 20th anniversary event, and a Halloween maze experience for kids hosted by Stine himself. Goosebumps was once again everywhere. Between 2008 and 2016, Goosebumps Horrorland, Hall of Horrors, and Most Wanted effectively formed the series' second golden age, a creative renaissance that revived the brand for the digital era while staying true to its roots. Now, by the mid-2010s, Goosebumps was long overdue for its big screen adaptation. I mean, Hollywood had been circling the franchise since the 90s. But it wasn't until Sony acquired the rights in 2008 that things would finally begin to move forward. And after years of false starts, finally the Goosebumps movie would be announced, and I think nobody expected that Jack Black would be cast as R.L. Stine himself. The film follows teenager Zach Cooper, who discovers that his reclusive neighbor, Hannah's father, or Mr. Shivers, is actually R.L. Stine, and that every creature from his books is real. When Zach accidentally opens the abominable snowman of Pasadena, chaos erupts. Slappy the Dummy, also voiced by Jack Black, soon frees every monster in Stine's library, turning the town of Madison, Delaware into a nightmare carnival of Goosebumps nostalgia. The only way to stop them, Stine must write one final story to trap his creations back inside. The movie released October 16th of 2015, just in time for Halloween, and it had surprisingly positive reviews.
The #1 movie in America is Goosebumps.
Really? High five!
It grossed over $150 million worldwide, becoming a modest box office hit and introducing the franchise to a whole new audience. Honestly, I wasn't really expecting the Jumanji treatment for a Goosebumps movie, but this was actually so much fun. This is just pure popcorn fun. It's filled with so many references to the books, and it even has like kind of a twist ending, and the film's ending even hinted at a sequel that would come 3 years later with Goosebumps 2: Haunted Halloween. I actually haven't watched the sequel yet. I think I'm gonna watch it this Halloween, but let me know if you enjoyed it. For many fans, that 2015 movie, it wasn't just a revival, it was a love letter to a series that defined their childhood. And of course, leading up to the movie, we saw the release of a new point-and-click adventure game and a mobile game. Guess which one was better? After the success of the Goosebumps movie in 2015, which catapulted Slappy the Dummy into mainstream pop culture, we would see Goosebumps Slappyworld arrive in 2017, and this series obviously leaned hard into Slappy's persona. Every book was narrated by Slappy himself and filled with his self-absorbed commentary, bad puns, and third-person gloating. It's like Tales from the Crypt if the Crypt Keeper were made of wood and had a god complex. This one had 19 books in total, plus one special 30th anniversary edition, and it lasted for 6.5 years, which actually made this the longest running single Goosebumps series ever, even surpassing the original run from the 90s. But even after Slappyworld wrapped up in 2023, R.L. Stine wasn't done. That same year, Stine launched Goosebumps House of Shivers, a brand new series that marked a return to form for the franchise. The first entry, Scariest Book Ever, released in September 2023, and it immediately stood out for its presentation. House of Shivers also brings back something that longtime fans missed: the original Goosebumps logo. That specific G was dearly missed. Combined with new new, vibrant artwork by Robert Ball, the covers have this more stylized, cartoonish look, and with 5 books currently on shelves, and 2 more releasing in 2026, One Night at Camp Bigfoot and What We Do at Night, it seems that R.L. Stine is a force that cannot be stopped. And honestly, it's kind of incredible that over 30 years since Welcome to Deadhouse first hit shelves, Goosebumps is still alive. It's still reinventing itself and still finding new ways to spook readers who weren't even born when the first book came out. In 2023, Disney would bring us a new Goosebumps TV show on Disney+. Only this one doesn't really feel like Goosebumps. I don't know. The reboot was okay for like a teen drama horror show. It kept me interested. It was fun to see how some of the classic stuff was retold, but it just lost all the charm of Goosebumps, in my opinion. And I get that they were trying to age it up for the longtime fans, but I think in doing so, they lost the essence of Goosebumps. Wait, you're telling me they brought Ross from Friends into season 2? Now that's a crossover I wasn't expecting.
Okay, I have to do something. I mean, I have to stop it.
Stop what?
I don't know, but I have a feeling that my being there will do it.
And it's cancelled. Season 2, also called Goosebumps The Vanishing, released in 2025, and yes, this is called Season 2 on Wikipedia, but it's actually like a new thing. You don't need to watch Season 1 beforehand, and I do think The Vanishing is actually a step up from the previous season. It's a good time, but it still falls a little flat in some areas, and again, it doesn't exactly feel like Goosebumps, but it was still entertaining. But now it looks like all future seasons have been cancelled. But hey, at least you can always go and rewatch the original show from the 90s. Now this year, we also got a new Goosebumps game, Terror in Little Creek, which you can tell is a game mill game as soon as you see it. This game seems okay. I don't really like the art style, but it looks like they put in a little bit of effort, at least with the gameplay and the stealth mechanic. I could see this one being a fun time, but there's just very little Goosebumps to this game. Where's all of Stine's creatures? At least there is some Easter eggs to the books, and I could imagine this being a story that Stine would write, but it just doesn't seem like it necessarily had to be attached to the Goosebumps name. I still might try it though, it looks fine, and at least we're still seeing new games be released in the franchise. Now over the years, there has been some graphic novel adaptations, so let's quickly talk about those. Now, in 2006, we would see our first Goosebumps graphics. This is the graphic novel version of Goosebumps that would adapt 3 of the stories. This was actually a pleasant surprise for me. I didn't read any of these growing up, but in preparation for this video, I decided to read a bunch of these Goosebumps graphics, and I had such a fun time. Each story in these collections is done by a different illustrator, so you get a good variety. Terror Trips is one of my favorites. I really liked One Day at Horrorland, and of course, Shocker on Shock Street. They really did such a good job adapting these stories, and it works perfectly having these kind of scary pulp stories be adapted to comics. It fits Goosebumps like a glove. And then after that, Slappy's Tale of Horror, which finally gave our wooden menace his own starring role. Then a more recent one in 2024, we would see The Haunted Mask. And I have to say, this is one of the best Goosebumps comics yet. I love the bright, colorful art style. I feel like it's definitely gonna work good for kids. It uses a lot of expressive faces and vibrant colors. And really, reading this one brought me right back to reading the book again for the first time. I think this is a fantastic adaptation. And then this year, 2025, we would see Monster Blood get its adaptation, and this one again was also very enjoyable. I think I liked The Haunted Mask a little bit better, but I would say the same thing for the books as well. Now, a question I'm sure many people are going to ask: does Goosebumps hold up as an adult? It depends. Your mileage might vary a little bit with this one. Sometimes the way the chapters end on a cliffhanger, it can get very formulaic. However, I find Goosebumps to be like a comfort horror read. So like you're not gonna have as much character depth as you would in a full adult novel. You're just not gonna have as much depth in general, but they are still so much fun, and they still manage to creep you out a little bit. At least me, where yeah, it genuinely creeps you out a little. Even reading these as an adult, they're fun, fast-paced stories, and I mean, the series was never meant to be like capital L literature. Goosebumps is snackable horror, kind of a gateway to get kids into the genre or just get them into reading in general. So reading them as an adult, you're kind of just reading them for fun and for the nostalgia. If you're nostalgic for the series, you'll probably still find some enjoyment reading them as an adult. Personally, I would highly recommend listening to the audiobooks for Goosebumps. They have some fantastic audiobooks. And there we have my massive Goosebumps retrospective. I have been wanting to make this video for years now. I'm glad I finally put in the effort to do so. It took a lot of research to make this video, so I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to tell me in the comments your favorite Goosebumps memories, whether it's the merchandise or share your favorite books or TV episodes. I would love to discuss with you guys everything Goosebumps down in the comments. Also, let me know what Remember Reading video you would like to see next. Maybe Remember Reading Redwall, Remember Reading the Bone comics, or remember reading the Spiderwick Chronicles. Let me know if you have any ideas in the comments, and as always, a huge thank you to all of my patrons, my channel members, and those of you that help out on Ko-fi. You guys honestly make these videos possible, and I can't thank you enough. And a special shout out to my most recent Knights Radiant tier patron, Fiona Moore. Thank you so much for the support.